Our next question will come from Frank. Frank is new to the Fireside Chat, so welcome, Frank. I know you've been waiting quite a while to get some of your questions answered. So if you please, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Donna, and hi, Tom. I've got a question related to fears, and in particular the fear of death and the fear of pain, which I think are two types of fears that almost everyone will admit that they have. So I understand that because of our high entropy, we enter this life and then encounter certain situations that then trigger our fears, and these fears are a tool that we should work on and to try to get rid of those fears and try to lower the entropy. So I think everyone, quite from the beginning of their lives, will have those fears of pain and probably death triggered. So now that we have to work on all our fears and try to get rid of all of them, is that also true for those two? Is the goal really also to get rid of the fears of pain and death? And is that even possible? I think you've said somewhere that you can really get rid of the fear of death only if you've had a really intense experience of the bigger picture, so that you know your consciousness, you're not your body. And but I somehow sense that the fears of pain and death, they still have also the function that we don't kill ourselves too early, so that we make sure our avatar survives. So I've got a few add-on questions, but only if there's time. So that would be really my main question. Okay. Is our primary goal to get rid of those as well?
And you make a good point, is that a fear of pain does have some survival value in thinking of our avatar's evolution. And our avatar's evolution, obviously, avoiding both pain and death were good things. If you are an avatar evolving in this world, you want to avoid both of those things so that you can continue. So if you eat a particular plant and it makes you sick, then you don't want to be sick again, so you don't eat that plant. You avoid that. It's not a good thing. So the difference is that you can use your mind to come up with things like, this is not a good plant to eat because it made me terribly ill, gave me a lot of stomach pain. But that's different than fearing it. You see, you've come to a conclusion. You've learned something. Now you're smarter than you were before. Now when you see that plant, you will no longer pick it up and eat it because you've tried it a couple of times and it always makes you sick. So now you're smarter than you were before. That doesn't necessarily mean that you fear that plant or fear eating that plant. So we have to break into different things. This idea of being aware of things that hurt and avoiding them because you're smart enough to do that, or avoiding things because you fear them. Two different motivations there. Okay, now the fear is always a problem. If you fear that plant, then that's irrational. If you fear, the bear that lives in the cave, the fear is irrational and won't help you. It will always be in your way. If you understand that the bear in the cave or the plant are dangerous and you need to take precautions, then that understanding is very helpful and just allows you to act more intelligently when you're in those dangerous situations. So fear is always a problem. If you run into that bear out in the woods and you fear it, you will produce an odor that will make that bear want to come after you because you smell like prey. You smell afraid. And if you immediately turn and run, you will induce that bear to chase you because that's what bears do. When things run away from them and they're predators, they chase. That's a predator reaction. So your fear will make you do exactly the wrong things, the things that make it more likely you get eaten by the bear. Whereas if you understand the dangers of bears in the woods, then you've probably come prepared. You have your air horn and your pepper spray, and you know whether you should stare at the bear's eyes or look away. You have some idea as to what behavior is going to trigger their aggression or not trigger their aggression. So at least you've optimized your probability of survival by being not afraid, by being able to function, not just be stricken by terror and run, you see, or just frozen in spot and can't move, any of those things. So fear is always a bad idea. Fear doesn't really help preserve you. Fear is always something that is a negative. Now, what about the fear of pain? Now we're really talking about fear, not just being smart to avoid things that might hurt us, but being afraid of things, having fear about them. Well, yes, a lot of people have fear around pain and they have fear around death. I would say death is probably the bigger one. Many times the pain, it's a little hard to separate whether that's just being smart and being more educated or whether that's a fear, But, we'll take the pain one, for instance. Let's say people who don't like going to dentists. Now, I expect that's almost all of us. I don't know anybody that really just can't wait to go to a dentist again, probably very few people who just love going to dentists. But when you go to the dentist, if you are fearful of the pain that you're going to experience, then what you do is sensitize yourself to pain. And every tiny little thing that you feel, you interpret as horrible pain. So the dentist can just kind of touch your teeth and it's painful. And when he has to drill out cavities, it's excruciating. Whereas if you're not fearful, you may not like it, and it is going to be painful, but you just go, well, it's just going to, it'll hurt a little bit, but it's not a big deal. I'll just, I'll get through it. I'll just experience it and it'll be fine. Well, then they can drill your teeth out without any Novocaine, without any painkiller, and it's not all that bad because you're not fearful. You're just accepting what the pain is, and you don't create more pain than's actually there. Reminds me of my daughter, Danielle, who if she would get a splinter, she was so fearful that before I even touched her, she'd begin to scream, as I'd get closer and closer with my tweezers to pull that thing out, and I haven't even touched her yet. She'd start wailing. And that was just because she had all that fear into how much it was going to hurt. And just the thought of it hurt. She could feel the pain just thinking about the pain she thought she was going to feel. So in that case, all I could have done is barely brushed her skin with a hair and she would have screamed. So that's kind of the pain thing. If you just accept it and say, all right, it's going to hurt to have my teeth drilled out. The world's supply of Novocaine is gone, and I'll just have to have them drilled without it, then most people could get through it okay. It wouldn't be pleasant, but it wouldn't be that bad either, you see. So fear, whether it's pain or whether it's death, is different than just being aware and accepting. So we can learn to accept pain when we have to, and then the pain generally isn't nearly so bad. Now, the fear of death is something bigger. Some people have a tremendous fear of death. Often those who have experienced death when they were young, they had a parent die while they were 5 or 6 years old, or their dog died when they were, at a young age or something, and they have this idea of death being a horrible thing, and they don't want to experience it, so they have this fear of death. It works the same way. When you get to the point in life that you can just accept death, death is what happens. It happens to all of us. It's one of the few things we can be certain of is that we are going to die. And when you just accept that, and that's okay, you don't find that as a terrible thing, then death loses its bite. It's not something that frightens you. And it turns out that people who have, bigger worldviews, I've heard these people called big brain people, but it has nothing to do with the size of their brain. It just means that people who have bigger pictures about life, they also have very little fear of death. And I read a study about that, and they looked at people who were considered to be brilliant people. Einstein was one of them, but he was just one of maybe 20 or 30 people in this study. And what they did is in talking with those people, and as the records of what those people had said and how they acted in ways that showed that they had very little fear of death, that they just accepted it. So as you have a bigger picture and see that death is just part of the process, then death is no longer fearful. Just because you're not afraid of it doesn't mean that you'd like to die or that you're going to jump off a cliff because you're not afraid of death. That's being stupid. That's back to the difference between being intelligent and being fearful. So being unafraid of death does not make you take risks. It just means that if you die, you accept that. I suspect the people who are very good at dangerous things all have that. If you are going to be a race car driver where your race car goes like 250 miles an hour in the straightaways and any kind of a mishap is often fatal, I suspect you have to make peace with death and accept that, or you wouldn't be in that business. You wouldn't be able to push your car right to the edge and maybe a little bit more. And if you don't push it to the edge and a little bit more, you'll never win. Because that's the person who wins, is the person that can go right up to that fine line between survival and not. That's the guy that wins the race. So if you're in that kind of a dangerous business, or you are one of those people that walks around 20 stories up on a piece of steel that's 12 inches wide, and you just walk nonchalantly, across the superstructure, and you're 100 feet in the air, but you're the guy that carries the rivets out to the person that's putting the rivets in, and you walk on those every day, you've had to already decide or come to the conclusion that death happens and it's not fearful. If you're fearful, you can't walk on a 12-foot wide beam and not fall off of it, because the fear makes you clumsy. Again, the fear creates the thing that makes the fear come true. So the fear of death, you don't have to have a major experience understanding that we are consciousness to get rid of the fear of death, but you do have to have a bigger picture that allows you to see and accept that death is just part of the process of living. If you're alive here, you're going to die here. And that's just the way it is. And you just accept that, and it's not a terrible thing. It's just the way of things. And once you accept it, then that fear goes away. So yes, you can get rid of those fears. They're not indelible. They're not something that is impossible to get rid of, but most people have them. It takes a concerted effort to get rid of them, but getting rid of them doesn't mean that you pretend to get rid of them. You see, that's another problem. You can convince yourself in your intellect that, death is just a natural process. There's nothing to be really fearful about. It'll happen when it happens. I'll try to be smart and clever in my life, so to put it off as long as possible, but it'll happen and that's okay. You can convince yourself of that intellectually, but your intellectual understanding won't help at all to get rid of your fear. Fear is not an intellectual process. It's an irrational process, and you have to deal with it down at the intuitive level, down at the knowing level. That's where you have to feel that it's okay, that death is not really a bad thing. It's just a thing. Mm-hmm. And that's how you get rid of it, down at that level. Usually a big picture that you understand that intuitively is what's required.
And so if I may just come quickly back to getting rid of the fear of pain, that's, well, you say you just have to accept it. That's probably for someone who still has all that fear. That's the very difficult part. I mean, understanding that it's bad to have it and that it doesn't make a visit to the dentist nicer. That's easy, that understanding. But yeah, how to get rid of the fear of pain? You just have to you have to experience it actually, and then tell yourself, actually, it's not that bad. There's no way really to prepare for all the terrible things that might come.
No, you just have to, in general, accept that sometimes things hurt and that the hurt is necessary. By the time you're done, it's going to be much better to have that cavity filled than to let that tooth just rot in your mouth. That is going to be much more painful, having that tooth rot in your mouth, than the alternative, which is to let the dentist drill out the rot and put a filling in it. So when you realize that that is the smart thing to do, then accept it and say the pain is necessary. I need to have the tooth drilled out. The pain is necessary because otherwise it'll be a lot more pain. So you just accept it, and when you accept it, yes, it hurts, but it's not a big deal. We can take a lot of pain if we have to, when we need to. Mm-hmm. As long as we're no, I don't want it. You know, we're in that kind of a frightened of the pain. That's when it hurts 10 times worse. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's just a matter of facing it, dealing with it, accepting that it is necessary, and then going forward. And most of us can do that if it's a down to the wire, life or death thing. You know, we can do that. It's not, like the muskrat, gets his foot caught in a trap. If he thinks that, he'll struggle with it for a while, but when he hears the trapper coming through the woods and he knows that the end is near, he decides that it's better to chew his leg off. And he'll chew his foot off in order to escape, because he can still survive even with one foot. He's not going to survive otherwise. So at that point, when it gets right down to the rock and the hard place, most people will face up and do the thing that will be the optimal, smart thing for them to do. Well, I don't know about most people, but at least some people will be able to do that. Others will not. Others will just sit there and wait for, some end because they can't function because the fear is basically in control. So, yeah, no easy way. You just have to accept it and let it be. And when you do that, you find that it's not as bad as you think. It's not as horrible as you think, because at the same time, you are creating a mental strength to help absorb that pain, such when that muskrat's chewing his foot off, the muskrat isn't feeling that pain like it would be if you just had it trapped and were cutting its foot off. You see, it is doing it, so it creates its own analgesic, if you will. It creates its own painkiller in the sense that it is just accepting it. Once accepted, then the pain just kind of rolls off like it's there, but you don't pay any attention to it. But you have to be accepting to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. I might have, if there's time later, I might have add-on questions, but I would like to let the others go first.
Okay.
Thank you, Frank. You're certainly welcome to come back and ask another question if we have time. We have Mario here also today. Welcome, Mario. Mario's question concerns anti-rats, the anti-rats concept that you have in your book, My Big Toe. This anti-rats concept was for sure one of the most difficult for me to grasp. I can picture someone going up and reducing entropy, and someone going down and increasing entropy. If by an anti-rat or anti-rats, we are talking about just people that are high entropy, that's easy. But it seems to me there is more to it that I don't catch. Could you please elaborate more on the anti-rats? Are some of them overarching negative organizations competing within the LCS for the people like the dark side of the force? Somehow part of a much bigger thing. Can you give us more of your concept of anti-rats?
Well, anti-rats in the book was just a metaphor, of course, for all of those things out there that make it difficult for you to grow up. All those people out there that help pull you down, all the environments and the kind of shared space, all the influences that help pull you toward higher entropy. Okay, that's kind of the anti-rats were just a metaphor for all the negativity out there that makes it harder for you to grow up and for you to become positive. for the most part, it was just what you said. That's easy. It's just people who are not very grown up. Just people who are struggling, but they show their lack of growth. They show their high entropy just in the way they interact, and they tend to be negative. They tend to have lots of fear. They tend to have lots of beliefs, and for the most part, that's what I meant by anti-rats. And that was the part you said, well, that's easy, and that's mostly what it was. It's just easy. It's just that. Now, there are some negative entities that are not physical. You know, we talk about, I guess we can talk about different groups of anti-rats. The main one I was talking about is, like I say, just people who aren't grown up, but that are physical here, people who have bodies here that are high entropy. But there are high entropy beings that don't have bodies here. And sometimes they may influence people that are here. So you can have anti-rats of a different type that are non-physical. But for the most part, that doesn't affect the average person. It affects the average person very little. It's not a major effect. It's an effect in the margins. It will affect individuals sometimes. The effect there is more on the movers and the shakers, because an anti-rat at the non-physical level is trying to manipulate, is trying to influence, and influencing somebody to go home and kick the dog and be rude to their wife. Well, there's not a big payoff in that. There's not a whole lot gained. So the movers and shakers of the world get more influence. That's negative, because they can affect more people at that level. Okay, coming from the non-physical rather than the physical. So there is some of that going on, but again, I'd say it's in the margins. Now, that sort of thing does not abrogate your free will. You still have free will. Even if there's something in your intuition that's saying, you should do a bad thing. You should be mean. You should smack that other person to get even. Even though there's something telling you that and urging you to do that, you can always say, no, I don't do that, because, I have higher quality than that. It's not a good thing to do. It's a high entropy thing to do. In the long term, it's going to cause me more trouble than it saves. It's just an ego thing to do. So even at these mover and shaker levels, they always get to say no. They have free will. But there is influence pushing and pulling them in all sorts of directions, because that's what we do to people who are movers and shakers. Everybody who has some sort of connection to them tries to influence them to their own benefit. And that is just the way the world works. So the anti-rats mostly are not a big deal. They're pretty easy. Occasionally it's from outside, not inside. That's in the margins and doesn't really affect things here that much. It's more the old metaphor that you have an angel on one shoulder that's whispering in this ear, telling you what to do that's good, and the devil on the other shoulder whispering in that ear, telling you what to do that's wrong, and that you get to choose as to which one you're going to listen to. Well, it's sort of like that, if you will. That little devil on your shoulder then would be the anti-rats. Some of that is just in your background, in your culture. Some of it is the people who tend to pull you down, and it could be from outside of our system. But mostly the system is made safe for us, so that outsiders cannot push us into things that we don't want to do. They can only encourage. But movers and shakers are used to being encouraged from all sides all the time, because if you have power, then everybody who has less power is trying to help steer your power. And they're very used to having that, and generally they know how to listen or not listen. So does that help, Mario? Yeah. I don't know if the rest of you know Mario, but Mario is the guy who translated My Big Toe to Brazilian Portuguese. He translated all 3 books. He has them all published, and they're for sale, I guess, for anywhere in the world. But Mario is the guy who has put MBT in another language, completed all 3 books, and has them out there. So thank you, Mario. That was quite an undertaking. He and, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 other people worked for, 2 or 3 years on the project. And about a year ago, they'd finished the last book and have them all out. So that's Mario.
Yes, thank you, Mario. That was a grand task indeed. We also have present here today Ingo. And Ingo, if you would like to go ahead with your question, please do.
Yes, thank you, Donna. I will read my question. Hello, Tom, and hello to everybody. Sometimes it's difficult for me to live graceful with uncertainty because I tend to worry that things don't work out well. I know that's likely a fear and ego problem, and I do some self-talk that growing up is about others, that fear doesn't help, and that challenges are good. Currently, for example, I have applied to graduate school and I hope they will accept me, but this is still uncertain. And my father inherited us a house with some mortgage left, and we hope the bank plays along and let us pay the amount back. I'm not concerned all day long, and I also have in parts a curious view of the future, but I have my moments of concern. Sometimes I also have the feeling I get little signs like, you are thinking too much, don't worry, everything is going to be okay. And usually it all went well, and all that worrying is unnecessary. It would be great to hear your advice about this habit and maybe a little encouragement to keep on the work. I think this is a common habit, and I hope others can also benefit from your response as well. Thank you very much, Tom.
Okay. The answer to this will be a bit of an extension from my answer to Frank. And that is, it's often difficult to know whether you're acting out of fear or whether you're acting out of, intelligence, right? It is good to let things unfold as they might. It's good to kind of go with the flow rather than try to struggle against the natural flow of things. But every interaction that you have is unique. Whether it's one of how you're going to pay your mortgage or, whether about your school, whether you get accepted, and if so, what are you going to do? What kind of, how should you prepare yourself for that? What kind of knowledge do you need to take that on? All of these things, you can approach any of them with fear, and you can approach any of them just with knowledge and acceptance. So you need to be aware. You need to be prepared. You need to be able to plan. All these things are just being intelligent, trying to optimize the choices you make to be good choices. Okay, so that's good. There's nothing wrong with having a brain and using it to, not eat berries that made you sick, 3 times in a row, or take your pepper spray and your air horn with you when you walk in the woods during mating season for bears. You should be prepared. You should think about things. But once the thinking turns into worry, once the thinking turns into something that you go over and over and over in your mind, say when you're trying to sleep and you can't sleep because you're thinking things, now you've kind of crossed that line into a fear. A worry is just a gray version of black fear. It's fear light when you worry. So think through the things that you're doing. Make your best choices for success in what you're doing. Having made your best choices, do it. Execute the choice. Now, every so often, you can go back and say, well, let me recheck those choices. Is there anything I missed? Did I get something wrong, or did I forget to think about something? Go back over it again, and if you say, nope, I don't have any real new data, then keep going. If you find that, oh, I see, I didn't expect that changes things, well, then change your plans. So you need to be flexible. You need to be able to think and rethink easily, but you don't need to get twisted up about, am I doing it right? Was that the right thing? Is that the wrong thing? Should I have done that? Should I have done the other thing? Do that once, and then once you've decided what you're doing is the right thing, then just proceed and do it and let the rest go. So when we say go with the flow, doesn't mean that you stop planning and you stop trying to make good choices for your future. It just means you stop worrying. You stop trying to make everything be the way you want it to be. As things work out or don't work out, you can make changes. Change your plans. Things are different. Okay, so you just react to them. You don't react to them with anger. You don't react to them with being upset. So let's say you take your tests and you fail your tests and you don't get in. Well, now you just accept that and you say, well, I didn't make it that time. Where did I go wrong? What was my weak point? What part of the test was I not so good at? And what parts were I good at? And if you can figure that out, then you go relearn that parts and you go take your test again. And okay, you just do it. You don't have to be angry with yourself. You see, that's just ego and fear. You don't have to be upset. You don't have to call yourself stupid or do any of those things. You just say, well, that happened. Now here's my choices now. I can let that go and not go that route, or I can study it and take it again, or, I can study it differently. So you see what I mean? It's just going through your life, making choices, changing your plans, dealing with things the best you can, and moving forward without the anger, without the recrimination, without the worry. Just, it's your life and it's unfolding. It'll unfold someplace, and wherever it goes, it's going to be good. Whether you pass that test and go on to become whatever it is that will enable you to become, or whether you change now and do something totally different, it's all a challenge. It's all good, and it can all lead you to a good place. So it's not like you're going to make a mistake and it's going to ruin the rest of your life. You're going to make a mistake, perhaps, and it means you're going to make a change, but life goes on and it's always good. It's always positive. You see, in that way, nothing can really go too wrong, because even if everything collapses and everything that could go wrong does go wrong, well, you pick it all up and you head off in another direction, and that's going to be full of great challenges, and you're going to learn a lot, and that's going to be fine. So it's that sort of attitude. Always have a positive attitude toward whatever it is you're doing. It's the overthinking, the worry, I really need this, I really want this, it has to happen, and if it doesn't, it'll be a disaster. You need to let go of it'll be a disaster. You need to say, and if it doesn't, I really want this, and I'm working hard for it, but if it doesn't happen, well, I'll do something else. And that something else will lead me to the next thing, which will lead me to the next thing, and that's life. However that shakes out, I'll live it to the fullest. Doesn't matter so much what you do as the quality with which you do it. That's what you learn from. Okay, so that would be my advice. Use your intellect. That's a good thing. Planning is a good thing, but don't get wrapped up around what happens. What happens is whatever happens, and you'll deal with it as it happens. If you start making plans such that this has to happen, then that has to happen, and this other thing starts to happen, that's when you get a lot of stress, and you get a lot of worry, and you get fearful that somewhere in that chain doesn't work. Your life's going to be terrible. And it's not going to be terrible. It's just going to be different. Because in order for a life to be terrible, you have to be full of fear and ego. Not about what you're doing or not doing. It's about, you have to be full of fear and ego. So if you're not full of fear and ego, your life's never going to be terrible. It's just going to be different. Does that help, Ingo? Or did I miss? You can ask back another question if you want, if it didn't quite hit the point.
It hits a point, and I appreciate your answer.
All right, thank you. Next, Chris is listening in, right? Chris, are you ready to ask your question?
Yes, Donna, I'm here. Thanks, Donna and Tom.
All right.
Mine are just a couple quick questions, and you can expound on them. What is your take on the development of artificial intelligence into the simulation? And do you think artificial intelligence could be an error correction to the overall simulation to help the AI, or to allow AI to help us in entropy reduction?
Well, anything could help us in entropy reduction. Anything, be it positive or negative, will create challenges for us to make choices. And if those choices are good, then that helps us grow up. So any change, any major change, the fact that we have an internet, that changes the way we make choices, changes the way we view the world. So all of these changes that are major changes will create a different set of choices. Because of this internet, the choices we have in a day are different than they would be without it. We have access to so much more information, so much more bad information and so much more good information. And, it challenges us to sort all that out. So, yes, your last part of the question, anything major like that will give us opportunities to evolve or de-evolve, and we can make either one. Either way, we can de-evolve or evolve because of them, and mostly they hold potential to go either way, because it's not the thing, it's the person making the choice that decides whether it's going to be an entropy reduction or an entropy gain. So not the thing itself, but how we interact with it. It's our choice that makes that difference, whether it turns out to be a good thing or a bad thing. It's about us, not about it being a good thing or a bad thing for the most part. It's how we interact with it that's a good thing or the bad thing. But okay, what about artificial intelligence, AI? Artificial intelligence comes in really two forms, and it's kind of a broad term. It has become, I guess, in the literature, kind of a broad term. And one branch of it is basically emulating humans, okay? Because the definition of intelligent is human. If you're human, then that's how you define intelligence. It's being like you, right? So yes, that is pretty arrogant and obviously full of ego, but that's the way we are. So if it mimics human, then it's intelligent. And as it mimics other things, then it's not so intelligent, because we are the very picture of intelligence in our own minds anyway. So if you can make a robot act just like a human, then we'll call that artificial intelligence. But that is an emulation. A robot can act like a human, but a robot can't be human, because the human has other characteristics besides just information. Characteristics it has are much more subtle. It has feelings. Okay? It has a lot of irrational components to it. It has more than just an intellect. Okay? So it has intuition. And these things are not things that you compute. These things are things that come with being conscious. So an emulation can be a very, very good emulation. It can be so good that we couldn't tell it from what it's emulating. Right? An emulation means it's just something that isn't A, but acts, looks, and smells like A. Like if you have a Apple computer, your Apple computer will have a PC emulator, something that will allow you to use PC software, and it goes into an emulator that makes it look like it's a PC to that software. You see, so that's a PC emulation inside of an Apple computer. Well, let's say you had a robot, and that robot had a lot of sensors that it could see and smell and hear and feel. It had lots of very sensitive sensors. Maybe they were more sensitive than our own biological sensors, and it could see, smell, hear, and taste much more sensitive than we could. So it could smell things we couldn't, hear things we couldn't. Well, maybe that would be better than human in the sense of its ability to do those senses, but how would you program its intuition? How would you program its feelings? So you could take that robot, and the robot could pick a rose and sniff the rose and tell you what species it was of rose and give you its Latin name, because all of that would be contained in a database, and the nose sensor would be able to sense that particular chemical that was unique to that particular species of rose, look it up on a database and say, make the match. Here's what my sensor said. That matches with this. That's a such and such species of rose. So it would make you think that this thing was human, but it's just an emulation. It's not conscious. It just is very quick at going through data. Okay, now, on the other hand, if you have consciousness, you have another level of processing going on that is not emulated with algorithms, and that is the intuitive and the feeling aspect, the emotional aspect. That robot who smells that rose doesn't particularly have an emotional connection to that rose. Now, it may go through its database and say, well, where have I smelled this before? Oh, yes, I smelled this at such and such a time, and that was a sad time, so I should act sad now and put the sad look on my face. But you see, it wouldn't feel sad. It's only an intellect. That being level doesn't exist. It's data, it's information. That's an algorithmic approach. All right. Now, if we go to more subtle things that aren't just algorithmic and data, they're things that have uncertainty in them. They're things that they make choices without having any data to make that choice. They make choices on hunches, or they make choices maybe if it's just by random. Those sorts of things, okay, have the ability to have free will. So it still could be a computer program, but the computer program's not just algorithmic. It's now, say, neural networks that program themselves in ways that the programmer doesn't do. The neural network changes its own internal code based on getting right answers. And after a while, the people who've created the neural network have no idea how it's coming up with those answers. It just knows that if you give it a lot of right answers, it will eventually figure out how to get right answers on its own, in its own way. And if you give it a complex problem, it may try to solve it just in its own way, in its own hunches. Now, maybe if we're clever enough, and I don't know that neural networks will be enough, we may have to invent some other kinds of ways of doing this, but eventually we can create software and hardware that actually makes choices, has a free will. And in which case, if it has free will and makes free will choices, some IUOC will log on and begin to play it. And when an IUOC logs on and begins to play it, that computer becomes its avatar. And it makes all the choices, and that computer is conscious. And it's got a conscious component. And when that computer dies or gets bashed or has its plug pulled out, that consciousness that was playing it, that IUOC that was playing that computer avatar, still exists and still lives, you see. So if you want to get religious and theological, you'd say that computer has a soul. You know, that computer is really conscious, and it has feeling, and it's fully conscious. So that is kind of the difference. And those two things may actually meet somewhere if we have, depending on the software and the hardware that's possible. We haven't invented that yet. So we don't know, not at least at the level of a human. We've invented that at the level of an insect already. We have programs that function like insects and make choices like insects and seem to have free will like insects do, but that free will is so small and so whatever that it seems to work pretty well with algorithms. We can mimic it real easily. So there's this point where maybe the two converge, but for now, I see those as two separate things. One is algorithm-based, and it can be a very fine emulation. And we have another that the actual software hardware itself creates a non-algorithmic free will choice. And that free will choice then can be played by a consciousness, just like the biological avatar that we call a human being can be, or a horse or a dog or a cat can be played by an IUOC. So that's kind of my idea on AI and conscious computers and that sort of thing. There's two different ways to get to it. But yes, no matter how we get to it, it will change our choices. Our decision space will be modified when we have algorithmic or conscious computers to work with, because that will be another whole set of choices. And again, we will make choices for better or for worse. If we make poor choices, it'll not turn out well. If we make good choices, it will turn out well. It's up to us.
Thanks, Tom.
All right, next we have Mao. If you'd like to ask your questions, I know you have two of them. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Donna. Hi, Tom. Hi, everyone, and Happy New Year. My question is related with Mario's question somehow. It's a little long, so just bear with me. Recently, I came across a couple of long videos that talk about the consciousness being fundamental, virtual realities, the need to become love, and so on. And they catch my attention because everything seemed to be aligned with MBT for the most part. But there came a point in which the presenters talked about the PMR as being as having been created by non-physical beings that literally feed on human fear and suffering, what the ancient Gnostics refer to as the archons or demons. Allegedly, these beings are more like machines without free will or creativity, but their programmed code is very efficient. They set the circumstances in PMR so that we are always pushed to a state of fear. Being so efficient, they are indeed in control of the fundamental circumstances of our PMR. They also operate through physical avatars and occupy positions of power in governments, financial institutions, and other criminal activities. The presenters said that due to the lack of creativity and love, our PMR is created by them, and it's really a bad copy of a much harmonious or other much harmonious PMRs. Our kind of PMR is also known as the Lucifer experiment. Apparently, this experiment appears every so often within consciousness and is rooted in the sense of separation and antagonism. Do you have any thoughts on this, Tom? In your experience with a much bigger picture, have you encountered something that would point to all this as being true?
Well, the answer to that in a word is no, never. I have not ever experienced anything that would lend any credibility to that concept at all. And I can't really see that would be a function of the system. That doesn't seem like it's something the system would do to lower entropy. You know, understanding the system, the larger consciousness system, and how it works and why it works, I don't see that such a thing as what you're saying would serve any purpose. It would seem it would have a negative purpose. The system, the way it is now, is our reality is what it is because of the choices that have been made from the beings that have played avatars here. And there's plenty of poor choices. We don't need to create, a system that feeds negativity. There's enough of that happens just naturally. And I see no point for it. I see no logic that you can hang it on. it seems to me to be a product of fear. It seems to me that as you get a bigger picture and you start wondering, what's the next bigger step, and you get to a point of a larger consciousness system or something like that, a fearful person will then begin to see things that are scary. Well, what if the LCS is evil? What if it, is doing this or doing that? And the idea that we are, I've heard it stated other ways. The way you stated it was maybe the best way I've heard it yet, but often it comes across as this is the prison planet. We're all really imprisoned here, and non-physical beings are sucking up our energy, and all the negativity that's here is put here on purpose because all of the emotion and feelings and angst and anger and all of that stuff is what these beings feed on, and this is called prison planet. That is just nonsense. It's people who are fearful making up something that's scary, because fearful people see fearful things. And it turns out then that spreads around, and pretty soon it's a conspiracy theory about, the people in charge here, they're part of the monsters that run this prison planet and part of it, and we're the victims. People who are fearful usually have a need to see themselves as victims, because that way they escape responsibility for it being the way it is. This world is nasty and whatever, but it's not my fault. I'm just a victim here. I don't have any, it's nothing I did or not doing or whatever. It's not that I didn't grow up. It's being a victim is a way of escaping responsibility for where you are and who you are and what you're doing. You don't have to take charge. You're just a victim. You can't do anything. You just suffer. Your job is to suffer, and somebody else makes all the rules. Well, I'm a victim. I'm helpless. No blame here. So I think that sort of attitude comes from a victim mentality, which comes from a fearful mentality, that whatever it is they see, they look for the dark side of it. Show them anything, and they will see the dark side of it, because they're fearful, and the dark side is the side that lets them be not responsible. They're victims. Okay? They're not responsible for the fact that this world is a nasty place and that it's full of fear, it's full of greed, it's full of anger, it's full of people trying to manipulate and take other people's stuff. It's not their fault. They're just an innocent victim. Whereas if you're not a victim, then you have to realize that you're either part of the problem or part of the solution. Either you're feeding this monster and help making it worse, or you are growing up and challenging others to grow up and not partake in the ego and the greed and the rest of it. So you do have a responsibility to grow up, and you can change things. So I think that's where it comes from. And I've heard that a lot. It's I don't find anything to support it, either theoretically, that it would possibly be that way, that the system could have something like that is supposed to be an entropy reducer. The system isn't going to create subsystems and virtual realities that are entropy creators. Now, it may create a system, and by the choices of those entities in it, they may become high entropy. Well, that's the result of their choices. But the system isn't going to create something that is fundamentally high entropy, because that's contrary to its own evolution. That's contrary to its own survival. That is not a rational thing for the system to do. And some of the confusion that you get was a very poorly understood metaphor that Bob Monroe had in one of his books. And it talked about one of his out-of-body excursions. He got this explanation from someone or some being, ran across it somehow, and that was that there were these beings out there who were feeding off loosh, Loosh, and this loosh was being created by the feelings of humans. So if humans felt a lot of emotion, then they create a lot of loosh, and these I don't know what you'd want to call them, these non-physical beings. I mean, you can turn them into extraterrestrials if you like, or you can just leave them non-physical beings, or you can make them devils, or whatever your theology puts forth. But they are then harvesting the loosh. So this place is a kind of a nasty place on purpose because it's a loosh farm. That's why there's so much bad stuff going on here. And it's a similar idea to what you said. Well, Bob Monroe wrote that in his book, and like all people who get things when they're out of body, they have to interpret it. And you get information, and then you interpret it the best way you can do. And Bob made the best interpretation he could. It was a metaphor, like all the things you get are metaphors. Metaphor is the way you communicate. You communicate in metaphors when you're out of body. Very seldom do you read books out of body, or watch movies or get things in linear detail. Mainly you get information metaphorically. Then you interpret that information you get. Well, the way that it works, I mean, what that loosh metaphor was all about is that we humans, we evolve and de-evolve here. Okay, we're supposed to be lowering our entropy and becoming love, but we aren't. We are often very egotistical and full of beliefs and do dysfunctional sorts of stuff. That dysfunction hurts us. That dysfunction keeps us from growing up. That dysfunction is part of what we have to work off. Okay, so if we de-evolve, then we're in a deeper hole to begin with than we were before. So the dysfunctional part is not good. It's something that puts us deeper and deeper into debt as far as evolving and having a low entropy, becoming love. So that's bad, this dysfunctional part. And that's mainly what we do. Now, it's not that the larger consciousness system sucks up loosh. It's that we create negativity for ourselves. We create our own problems. Okay? That's what's really going on. We create our own problems here. And love is the way to grow out of it. So Bob got a metaphor Bob got some information. He didn't actually get that metaphor. The metaphor was his own. We make up metaphors to explain the data we get. So he got something that talked about all the greed and the rest of it, of how that was damaging and how that was not a good thing for us, and that most people fed that negativity in their life here. And he took that and he turned it into loosh, and that basically, we were a planet being farmed by others who were feeding on our loosh, and that's not right. It wasn't the right context. It wasn't the right metaphor. So unfortunately, when you make a mistake like that and you put it in your book, 10 million people read it and they take it literally rather than the metaphor that it is, and they miss the metaphor altogether. That the negativity here is not good, which was the metaphor that Bob had. So no, I have no experience that says any of that's true. Matter of fact, my understanding of the larger reality says that I can't find a hook to hang that on. I can't find anything that the system would, any reason why the system would do something, put effort and energy into creating something that was against its own self-interest. That was something that was drag. It was a drag on its own evolution. That doesn't compute. This is an intelligent system. It's not going to create things that are a drag on its own evolution. So I just kind of put that off to fearful people finding, they say that, if you're a very positive person, you find a silver lining even in a dark cloud. Well, some people who are paranoid and full of fear, they find a black lining in every silver cloud rather than a silver lining in every black cloud, and they find something to fear everywhere. And you can always find things that kind of validate your fear. If you live in New York City, and you're terrified of elephants, you will see a puddle on the ground and say, aha, see, that's an elephant's footprint. And you will see evidence of elephants everywhere. You'll see bushes shake in the distance, and you'll say, aha, there's elephants hiding behind those bushes. See those bushes shaking. So you will find things that justify your fear in your environment. So people who come up with fearful ideas then go to great lengths to find justification for those things. And I find them all unnecessary in the sense that there's a much easier and better and positive explanation for things. And the fearful explanation doesn't add anything new. It doesn't add anything that you can't get to in another way as far as coming up with a theory of reality and how it works. So there's just no point in it. It's an idea that has no value, no lasting value. It's just a negative, fearful thing. So no, I just call that fearful nonsense.